And as you know, we record these sessions so that you can access them later. Sometimes there's such good nuggets that you want to go back and find out, okay, what was that when I'm ready to do that? Just an overview of our session today. Again, a warm welcome to all of you. I see again that we've got TDSB teachers, we've got community educators, we have student teachers. It's always so nice to be in this community. We absolutely want to start with a land acknowledgement and really connect to the place that we're at. And then we'll take a look at two programs that we're offering for teachers to delve into climate change. One called Climate Literacies and Leadership Program. The other one I mentioned is our Action Research team, and I'll introduce those separately, tell you a little bit about them. I'm so happy to have our teachers with us, Nancy, Beka, and Dan, and then we'll tell you also what's coming next. If you got the notice, this is our last webinar of the year. So I'm so happy again that you've joined us. So let's start with our land acknowledgement. Again, you may recognize the artist, Christy Belcourt. She's a Métis visual artist, designer, community organizer, environmentalist, social justice advocate, and an avid land-based arts and language learner. She has a deep respect for the traditions and knowledges of her people. Like generations of Indigenous artists before her, she celebrates the beauty of the natural world while exploring nature's symbolic properties. Following traditions of Métis floral beadwork, Belcourt paints in dots and uses the subject matter as metaphors for the human existence to relay a variety of meanings, which include concerns for the environment, biodiversity, spirituality, and awareness of Métis culture. She is a lead organizer for the Onamen Collective, along with Isaac Murdoch, which focuses on the resurgence of land language and land-based practices. Without further ado, we want to acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And also, without saying, we know that the land acknowledgement is just a first step to acknowledge the land that we're on, and we're all in the process of that reconciliation. Noticing land, being on the land, and learning to advocate for environmental justice for our Indigenous peoples. All right, so today we're going to be presenting first our Climate Literacy and Leadership Program. Nancy's going to tell us what she did this year. There were 20 educators engaged in this process. Really, we put a call out to educators and said, hey, do you want to deepen your ability to engage with climate education in the classroom? And of course, we look at climate education from a real broad perspective. So all the way from climate emotions, climate knowledge, but then getting into action and then understanding the different ways that we can, embrace climate justice through our actions. And so you see that it's a collaborative inquiry. So we gave participants a chance to visit each other's classrooms, to work together, and then kind of explore. Of course, it's also an iterative process, but with only a year to do it, we tried to keep people's projects manageable so they could work with their students. We hope to share these on our website. But really, I want to welcome Nancy Gillis to the presentation. Nancy is a grade 2-3 teacher at Crest Haven, and Crest Haven is a proud platinum school and has been for a long time based really on the collaborative leadership of students and staff that Nancy coordinates and really helps that community celebrate their connections to nature. Nancy, I understand you're going to be telling us about the Maple project that you did with your students and how that was. So I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Pam. So even though I'm about to talk about the maple sap to syrup process, I wanted to start off with this photograph because this was where I was originally headed with my inquiry project. Originally, as Pam and I were meeting together and sifting through what I wanted to do, I was interested in connecting my inquiry to this nature study area, which we were lucky enough to plant at our school last spring, and we added to it in the fall. I was looking for my students to maybe learn a little more deeply about the trees and the shrubs that have been planted here. I was looking for them to then take a leadership role in creating, whether it be some signage, some QR codes, scavenger hunts, but this idea of them becoming leaders in passing along their knowledge to others in the school and others in the community. The problem I encountered was that we were very immersed at the time in a sap to syrup project. Another problem I encountered was at the time of our CLLP meetings, it was also very much wintertime, and there wasn't a whole lot to see out in our nature study area. Everything's very young. There were a lot of twigs. So I was toying with, do we research now and then wait till we can see everything out in leaf again? And if only I wasn't so busy with this maple syrup, I would have more time to do my inquiry. And suddenly it just occurred to me, you know what? You're looking for an opportunity for your students to connect what they're doing outside back in the classroom and then take that to becoming leaders and sharing their knowledge with others. And so I just shifted my focus into doing it with what we were already immersed in. So I don't want to take credit for the amazing Sap to Syrup program that happens at Cresthaven. It was started by my colleague, Melissa Bulgach, but Melissa left us this year to go work at Forest Valley. And so I decided that we could not let this amazing project, which is tapping trees in our community, in our neighborhood, we couldn't let it go. So I did decide to take it on with my class, that we would be the coordinators and the leaders, but we would get the school involved. So this is my students delivering letters to the community members who in the past have allowed us to tap their maple trees and asking if they might like to let us do this again. I did say it might not be as big and beautiful as it was with Ms. Bulgach, but we'd like to give it another try. And they all responded with an outstanding yes, go right ahead. So here we are. Every class in our school had at least one tree that they were responsible for setting up. So they drilled the hole, they put in the spile, they hung the bucket, and all the classes had a sign-up sheet in Google Docs, and everybody helped to collect the sap over several weeks. So there we are, getting one of our trees ready. So we are very lucky. We have several sap buckets that we've purchased over the years. We have, I think, a dozen of them. And so we were equipped for this. You could certainly do it small scale. You could certainly tap a tree. You might have a tree on your property. You could also connect it to a visit to an outdoor ed center during sap to syrup season. And, there's a lot of opportunity to make these connections without going as big as we went, but certainly this is amazing. So everybody's doing the work of going around to all the trees in the neighborhood, gathering the sap, bringing it back to our kitchen. So my class was very involved in the next steps, filtering the sap, getting it in the fridge, doing a quick boil, and then later, a tasting of it as sap. So the whole school had the opportunity. We kept the sap in the fridge, nice and easy for everyone to access. We had a little set of tiny cups that everyone just bring your class, have your sap tasting, wash your cups, put them back for the next class. So that was our tasting. And then we started to do our boil. And so a lot of filtering and boiling and checking temperature and observing the changes as we went along. I have grade 2s, so a lot of connections as well to the water cycle and what's happening in this process. And then eventually we had a great yield of syrup. Our syrup, I'm going to be honest, it's a little tiny bit bitter. It turned out okay. Something that I'll speak to a little bit when I start to share the student learning is that we did have a very strange winter season. It was quite hot, quite fast. And if the maple trees start to bud, that does impact what your syrup will taste like if you collect sap from a tree that's already started to bud. So we had not the best syrup, but we did it. We also did go to Forest Valley to the Outdoor Ed Center. So the students had an opportunity to tap a tree there as well, repeat the process, but also to look at some of their displays that they have set up. So this one looks at early Indigenous methods for collecting sap from trees and also for how they would have taken that sap and made syrup. So you can see there's hollowed out logs and the sap goes into those logs. There's rocks that get heated in the fire. Antlers are being used as a tool to lift the the hot rocks and put them in with the sap. And then as that sap heats up, it starts to reduce into more of a syrup. That syrup can be preserved. It can be carried around. It can be made into like a harder sugar that they can keep through the winter and so on. And then we learned as European settlers began to come to Canada, how a change in tools and equipment shifted that sap to syrup process. So now we have a yoke to help gather, and we have metal pots and a metal spoon. And so how things have evolved over time. And then we were able to see modern methods too, which still include the buckets that we used, but also a tubing system. If you have a hill and gravity, that you can have a tubing system that then carries the sap into a larger canister. Now, we made our own syrup at school, literally on the kitchen stove. The staff room always smells really, really good for quite a few days. I did take a big batch home on the long weekend as well in the spring to keep boiling over the weekend. But at Forest Valley, they had the opportunity to also see a larger scale evaporator and see if you were a producer of maple syrup, what it would look like. So then came the part where I wanted the students to do some deeper learning. So they learned about all sorts of different parts of this process. They learned about the math behind it. They learned about some of the science behind it. They made some connections to social studies. And so they worked collaboratively in small groups. We had a list of different parts of the sap to syrup process that they might be interested in, and they signed up for one that they wanted to become experts on. So I used some books that we had, but mostly some resources from Forest Valley, some print resources that they usually send before you go on an excursion, and sort of gave each group the materials that they needed. And then they took it from there to develop. We decided that we wanted our information piece to be a book. So they each worked on their part of a book. So they did their research, they put together their writing, they decided what illustrations, what diagrams would best illustrate the part that they were doing. So now we are just finishing up, just wrapping up the last stage of this process, which is their text and tasting event. So they are now hosting all of our classes at Cresthaven in the library, where we have a team of readers who are taking the class through our books, and then they get to have a little tasting of syrup as they go along. So now this is their opportunity. They've done the learning to now share that learning with the rest of the school. So a lot of the school was involved with the tapping and the sap collection, but maybe they didn't do a lot of deeper things back in class. So now they're starting to learn some of those other layers. And we're also typically Melissa used to send each family that let us tap their trees. She used to send them a little the tiniest little bottle, like a typical maple syrup bottle. She used to send that to those families as a thank you. I feel like our syrup is okay, but it's a little bit bitter, and hers was probably better. So we're actually going to give each family a copy of the book instead, just to do something different this year. And it'll also allow the students to take that learning. They've shared it with the school, and now they can share it with the community as well. And I'm just going to switch slides, give you an idea of the book that they've made. So just to give you an idea of those different topics. So I have a grade 2-3 class this year. So in terms of my grade 3s, there was a lot of opportunity to learn for their plants unit for science, what's happening with the trees. So what is this sap? The sap's in all the trees. How do trees make their own food? Where is the sap in the summer? What's happening in the winter? Why is the springtime this perfect season for tapping trees? Why do we choose to tap maple trees? What's special about maple trees? Typically, we tap sugar maples for making syrup, but it's interesting to note too, in our neighborhood, they're mostly Norway maples, which are not Indigenous to Canada, but that's what we tap because that's what we have access to, and we end up with pretty great syrup as well. We have one true sugar maple in the mix, so that's sometimes also an interesting discussion, is the difference between the types of trees. We had an opportunity we were working with fractions, so to tie fractions and percentages into our learning. How much of the maple syrup in the world does Canada produce? Where is it produced? And then we got into time and temperature. So when are we tapping trees? Why are we tapping trees? I loved this because this was a nice connection to thinking about climate change. So this group took weather data, true weather data from January through to when we stopped collecting sap in early April. And they looked at what should be ideal lows at night and highs during the day for the sap to be flowing. And if it was just right, they colored the box green. And if it was too cold, they colored it blue. And if it was too hot, they colored it red. So typically you would tap trees in February and March. That would be your season. You can see that actually January had a lot of perfect days for the sap to flow. And March was really too hot, that there were days when we were collecting sap and the temperature was going well beyond where it should be. So this was an interesting place for some discussion around that. Lots
Nancy,
to do with measurement. Yep.
Nancy, I'm going to stop you there.
Yep.
But yeah, because there's so much to share, and I love this book and all that. And Nancy, you have such a gift of connecting all the pieces of what you're doing to the curriculum, but also to the students' inquiries and curiosities. Could you remind us, just as we wrap up, what was your inquiry question?
I was looking at finding opportunities for the students to become the knowledge keepers and share that knowledge with a broader group. So first their book to the school, and then their book to the community, at least the community that joined in and said, sure, tap our trees, go ahead. And so they did that deep learning. They learned about all those different layers and then sharing that with everyone else.
Wonderful. And I wish we could give the whole presentation to each one of you.
That's fine. And as soon as I shared my screen, my clock disappeared. So I was like, and now I can't see the time.
Well, you did that marvelously. And the reason I wanted to bring out your question is because both of these professional learning communities were focused around questions, around the teachers' questions and their desire. And I love how yours was about student leadership. And we really could add another layer, which is how can we use student leadership and the maple practice to also teach about climate change through maple syrup, which is something they directly connect with. So I'm going to share my screen again just to talk about the second PLC we have. And for those of you who don't speak EduSpeak, PLC is a professional learning community where people gather to improve practice. And so this one builds on inquiry, but takes it a little bit further in that it's, again, teacher-led research. Both the CLLP and the action research are teacher-led. And what you're doing is developing evidence base. So the requirement is to collect a lot more evidence about student learning, how the students are interacting with the materials. And that way, when you share it with others, you have data and artifacts that help you understand what's going on. And as you can see from the graphic, it is an iterative process. As you plan and you act, and then you look at the data, and then you plan and act again. And so, and we do actually have some publications from past PLCs that are on the TDSB environmental web page, and I'm sure Sarah will put that in. One note before I pass it over to Beka and her wonderful grade 5 students, and we have Alex and Kyoshi and Billy here to tell the story of their action research. I know I see Tori here, and Tori, you shared an amazing resource about Indigenous technologies. I'm wondering if you could put the name of that in the chat, because as we think about Indigenous people sharing their technologies with us and the gift of maple syrup, etc., people could find out other amazing technologies. Okay, Beka, I'm going to stop talking. It's over to you and these wonderful guests.
All right, super excited to be here, and I love that some of my fives are with me. So I'm just going to share a screen here. Hopefully everyone can see it. So we looked into gardening and the idea of ecological identity this year. And how this all started, oh, can I get to my next screen? Here we go. It all started in a garden right across from our school is a farm called the Common Table Farm. It's a church property that they've allowed to become a farm. And I'm just eyeing it, being like, oh, I really want to connect with this. So we finally in November got to go, and they led us through a garlic planting activity in November and also a seed saving activity. And this launched so many things. So the very next day after this experience, Pam Miller was sitting beside her in our Action Research first team meeting of the year, and she helped me form a question. So what she said is, how can students' ecological identities be developed through environmental and sustainability and education? So it was a nice big umbrella topic, because I find myself sometimes going very niche sometimes. And she helped me do a little sub-question here about connecting ecological identity and gardening. Why not have a garden right beside my school this year? And then another idea was, what does it look like to have students as co-researchers? And I've actually brought my 3 team leader students with me today. So we'll dive into this a bit. First of all, we had to understand what even is ecological identity. And basically, it's how humans relate to the world around them. And it's coined by Mitchell Thomashow, and his book is incredible. My class wanted to come up with their own ideas about it. They said things like your identity and connection to nature, how nature affects us. It means nature doing something to us, how the earth leaves an imprint on you or your memory, how we connect to nature, not only as human beings, but also to other animals. I think ecological identity means the impact nature has on us, how the earth impacts you, how we're similar to nature. Billy, do you mind reading what you wrote here?
Who you are in nature and how it changes the way you feel about yourself.
And he asked, have you ever felt that when you're in nature, you cannot really be someone else other than yourself? I love that. And lastly, there's no single way of defining ecological identity. And this is a kind of a theme that even you'll see later, we got to meet Mitchell Thomashow and he said this. There's not really a way to define it. So Alex, would you mind sharing really quickly about this here?
So first, we basically got sticks and we decided to make this tree. And basically, the small leaves talk about what we think about it. And then the bigger ones show the definition, and there's photos and what we feel in that moment.
Yeah, so that's like their lived out experience of ecological identity. We kind of track it on our board. So with this research question, we also got connected to a youth climate action grant. Again, thanks to Pam for letting me know about that, and a Gen Action project. And it sounds like I'm adding stuff on myself as a teacher, but everything just fit together perfectly. So we decided to apply for a grant. It was for $1,000, and we did get it in the end. And I'd love for my 3 boys to just talk a little bit about that. Alex, can you go first and let us know a bit more about this?
Hello, my name is Alex, and I'm one of the research group leaders. So our goal was basically to use natural pesticides. At first, we were thinking about saying, oh, why don't we just make it like why pesticides are bad and why we should use actually natural ones. But then later, after researching a long time, we found out that pesticides were actually banned. So we decided to focus mainly on the topic of natural pesticides. A big problem when we were doing this was really just having the part where we had to research and then we found out, oh shoot, we can't have that piece over here. Our group members worked very well together. We used our strengths and we learned our weaknesses. We put our strengths together and we were able to finish our work well. And when we finished it, it felt really good. Our group members have played a big part in this ecological identity youth climate action grant. And I think the group members also should deserve a lot of credit to this.
Thanks so much, Alex. And so his group focused on natural pesticides. And Kiyoshi, can you tell us a little bit about the group that you led? What was your research?
All right. So, my name is Kiyoshi, and I am the team leader of 6 other students. The topic we decided on was 4 of the 5 senses. We decided to exclude sound because you can't hear because food doesn't talk. We chose this topic so people are aware how different herbs, fruits, and vegetables smell, taste, look, and feel. A challenge I had being team leader was having to manage what my group was doing. For example, 1 or 2 people would be working on the scent station, 1 or 2 people would be working on the taste station, etc. That way, everybody had something to work on. A rewarding experience being group leader was that eventually we got the job done, and it was really fun.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kiyoshi. And Billy, what did your group focus on for your research?
Hi, my name is Billy. I'm my project group leader, and my group is focused on edible gardening and how to prepare and eat what you grow. So our focus, how that is sustainable to the environment is that you don't always have to drive to the grocery store, drive back just to get something simple like an onion or something like that. And you can save it. Also, it may not seem like a lot if it's just one person, but if it's a lot of people doing that, it can make a really big impact. A challenge I had as a leader was picking what we were going to focus on because I had a lot of group members with a lot of great topics, and we only had select only one. Eventually, we used an online spare wheel. I know it sounds a bit unprofessional, but it works. And finally, a rewarding experience I had as a group leader was just working in a group. I like sharing the workload, and I knew I would not be able to get this done without the rest of my group, and the humor never hurts. So yeah, that's my group in a nutshell. So thanks for listening.
So much, the 3 of you. So they led this research. We did have to put 3 student names on the grant. So this is how we came up with our 3 leaders. They were kind of voted in. We then got to go back to the same garden a little bit later in the winter, and it was for a different reason. So talking about edible foods led to naturally talking about pollinators. So they invited us back, and they got my students involved in picking pollinator plants for the garden. So they went in the winter and kind of saw all the dead boring parts, but it's actually pretty interesting. And they gave our students these sheets to fill out for them because they really wanted to decide what pollinator plants. So my students, there's 21 plants, 21 students, they all researched a plant, and that helped this garden be able to choose their pollinator because they got a pollinator grant. So we got to help them choose that. Then we went back in the spring, and you can see here the garlic that they planted in November. So it was so beautiful for my students to see that cycle of life happen and be a part of it. And this picture here, they're guessing how tall it's going to get once it's all done. So I loved revisiting the garden. And a special experience, thanks to Hillary, she connected us with Mitchell Thomas Show, and he was absolutely incredible. He zoomed in with us, showed us his geodes behind him, and just really inspired my kids about the idea of connecting with nature. And so that was a very memorable experience for us this year. Last Thursday, I was with Dan, who you're going to hear from next. We actually walked to this school. We meant to take the bus, but we just kept walking, and there we ended up at Don Mills Collegiate, and my students got to see so many different kinds of gardens. So this outdoor one here, and aquaponics, and Haudenosaunee Mound, the only vineyard. My students love this fun fact, the only vineyard in the world that is on a school property, and also greenhouse. So Dan was just incredible at bringing them around and just inspiring them to see, the kind of so what about growing your own food and how many people it can impact. Some upcoming activities. So on Monday, we're actually presenting at our school for our whole community. And the next day, we're presenting at the Ontario Science Centre. And again, Pam Miller connected us with something called Gen Action. So it's really neat that as a teacher, nothing felt an add-on or like, oh, there's this other thing. It was like, oh my gosh, everything's fitting together, and we get to present here and the next day present there. It just tied up the whole year. So that's kind of some of our experiences and what we had with the garden this year.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you, Alex, Yoshi, and Billy. Your voices are so fabulous. You're well practiced. You knew what you wanted to say, and you brought so much enthusiasm to the yes. Sorry, Becca.
I realized I did have one more slide. Can I do it?
I'm pretty sure you can fit that in.
Because it's their student voice about the gardening impact, which was my question from the beginning. So I just wanted really quickly to read what they said about being in the garden, which is what I wanted to kind of track this year. So being in the garden has helped me learn how to be around nature and be a part of it. It makes me want to grow plants even more. Being in the garden lets me know that I like planting. I now know there are more than 3 types of bees. Being in the garden has impacted me by seeing baby plants and fruits and vegetables and flowers and made me want to explore nature even more. Being in the garden impacted me as a person by learning that I really like being in nature and planting things. This person just talked about being out at recess and feeding ants and being fine that there's no park there because there's flowers and other things. I remember my kindergarten teacher planting and taking care of the garden. It has told me to take care of nature. Being in the garden has taught me that nature is precious and we can't lose it. It has practically everything we need. I have learned that I like gardening more. I like the time we went to the garden during the winter because we got to use the magnifying glasses to look at the plants. And I learned that looking at plants with magnifying glasses is better than looking at plants normally. The end.
Oh, so wonderful. And of course, the connection to climate change and our action research is when we change hearts, then we can change our actions. And so I love how you're changing hearts and the way we connect to nature. That's wonderful. So thank you for also making the introduction to Dan. Dan is a high school teacher at Don Mills, and you saw his urban farm, and he does so many great things around urban farming. But I'm going to let him tell his story. Over to you, Dan.
Well, thank you, Pam, and thank you, Beka, as well. That was outstanding. Nice seeing your kids in the pictures. That's awesome. And I wrote down a quote from a wise man that I'm going to use every day. A little humor never hurts. Billy. I like that. I like that a lot. Good job, Billy. And just to clarify, it's the only vineyard at a high school in the world, because there are some universities and colleges. So, but we're okay with that. So as mentioned, we do quite a few things over at Don Mills. I've been here for 24 years, so I have the advantage of time. That's for sure. And we are a high school, so we have some abilities from our secondary students that these young ones that are at Nancy's and Beka's school are already pushing us for sure. But we have a greenhouse, we have aquaponics, there's an orchard, Haudenosaunee Mountain Gardens, a vineyard is mentioned. And we have a beautiful operating farm that's multi-season. We've got a polytunnel in there, which I think you saw some pictures from Beka as well. Thank you very much. And it's a wonderful space for exploring food, ability of communities to be resilient, different flavors. We have 3 different classes that participate. One is Green Industries, which does the planning and the planting and the raising of all the vegetables and fruit. We have the Hospitality and Tourism class that reaps the benefits quite literally, harvests and cooks and prepares and preserves. And we have the Technological Design class that does a lot of the work around the planning, the designing, and the physical building. All 3 classes get involved in grant writing. So it's been mentioned a couple times. These grants really matter a lot. And Hillary and Pam are amazing at sharing some of these opportunities out there. And those of us with experience getting these grant proposals through, we can certainly share more information with any of you who are new to it. But for me, having the high school students, we're able to get the students to actually work on these proposals as part of their classes. So we have that ability. I'm going to share 2 examples of something that we didn't really expect that we'd be doing. Not when I started these farms. Obviously, the connections that we make are deep and bountiful, and there's so many ways to connect to food. Luckily, we all have some amazing colleagues. I have Ben Gross, who's our head of Social Global, and he teaches some really challenging history-based classes, including courses like genocide, anti-Black racism through North American lens. Does a lot of work with Indigenous communities and Facing History. Does a lot of work with Facing History and Azrieli Foundation. And so Ben and I together find ways to connect as deeply as we can. Two of these joint projects we decided to do as part of my action research this year. And action research question that I put forward and Ben followed up with. I will grab it right now. That was basically connecting history to food. So how do students find a way to connect with their own personal and family histories through food? And that went into food preservation, and then it went into historical figures, not only Indigenous survivors, but also survivors of the Holocaust. And so we packaged that with websites. And again, our students are able to do some amazing things. So our first one was preserving history. I'm going to share a screen now. So preserving history. This is our first one. And it started with the produce from the farm. And my students in the hospitality class were already planning on doing the pickling. And Ben asked if he could join us. And we kind of went at it from different points of view. A lot of our students are in both classes as well, so that helped us certainly. The hospitality and tourism classes are college-bound classes, and Ben's classes are all university-bound. And so there's slightly different approaches to how we're working on these things. But we're making those connections and also getting students to reflect deeply on how it connects to their family histories and where they come from. And obviously, every school in Toronto is very multicultural. Don Mills is actually one of the most multicultural. So we had a lot of stories that students were bringing in and sharing as well. Can you click on the pickling process?
Mm-hmm.
So everything you see here is photos from either teachers or students. And it's all the produce that we have in the farm. And they enjoyed the process for several days, from the collection out in the farm to the preparation, the cleaning, the jars, the collecting of recipes, both from Ben and myself and our mothers and our grandmothers. And these links are there, so you can scroll through these things on your own time and enjoy. There's actually some recipes there that you can love. Alex and Kiyoshi and Billy, you can make these too at home. I think you should do that. And the recipes are all there with all of our photos. And we try to keep it as simple as possible, so that it was very successful. But what we really enjoyed was watching the students learn and be together, but in particular, the student reflections that came up after. And there's our farm right there. And you can see the opening lines. And our students did the website. I would never in a million years try to take credit for this because I can't do this. I can't even share my screen. So this is, they're quite amazing. But when you read these reflections, I guarantee you will shed a tear or two. And then the research and bibliography section really explains what our action research was, Ben's approach, and my approach as well. So if you can see that over in the research and bibliography approach, and it explains a little bit. And it also has a nice link to the TDSB OISE Action Research section and breaks it all there. I think it's a good example of a website. So once we did this, one of Ben's colleagues from the Azrieli Foundation offered an opportunity to us to work with some memoirs from the Azrieli Foundation, which was a pretty heavy ask. These were recipes of survivors of the Holocaust and recipes that survivors of the Holocaust wrote down on behalf of those that didn't survive. And it covers a wide-ranging Jewish diaspora. And we were offered the opportunity to get access to these and possibly cook some of them with our students. And then that moved into another opportunity to work with a Holocaust survivor, Pinchas Gutter, who was 93. And Pinchas no longer wants to come to schools to talk a lot about the Holocaust. You can imagine how heavy that would be over and over again. But when he found out we were going to cook, he asked if he can cook with us. And this was quite the opportunity. And so everyone's wonderful grandfather was represented in Pinchas. And he told us stories about his childhood and youth. And it was like a favorite uncle being in the room. And we made kugel, latkes, moose. We made challah in the wood-fired oven. And we also made a cholent, which I learned is a really, really wonderful recipe. If you've ever used a slow cooker, this is what a slow cooker is based upon, being able to make cholent for the Sabbath without working on it for 24 hours. The amazing thing was we had power issues in the building, and so we had to use all of our outdoor equipment in a wood-fired oven. And it's the same sort of layout. You've got the recipes. You've got, if you go to the home, we talk about the survivors, different survivors, both Holocaust survivors and some Indigenous survivors of the 60s scoop and other situations as well. And so in this way, history has come alive. Our students are deeply engaged in it, doing it as a land-based, food-based opportunity, connecting with their own histories, their family histories, finding similarities. And the student reflections in this section are deep and rich, and I can only get through 2 or 3 of them at a time because there's a lot of deep meaning behind all of them. And the students did a really great job of separating those with their colleagues, historical connections, family connections, and then of course the deep personal experiences. And again, the research and bibliography is right there. It's my understanding this project was actually shared today at a Holocaust education conference in Glasgow. So I haven't even mentioned that to Hillary yet. But this is where the TDSB and OASI Action Research, that we were able to bring it to life. It started with a land-based thing, with a food-based thing, and then just looking at historical connections. And I can tell you our grade 12s are richer for it, and Ben Gross and I are that much more richer for it as well. And the nice thing is you get to explore these websites. And we're already starting to talk about what we're going to do next year, which is pretty great.
That is amazing. Amazing. It's just this from the grade 2s to the grade 5s to what's possible in high school. And being able to bring in student reflections and deepen their experiences in real world ways. Amazing. Dan, I've seen this again. I just love seeing this. Wow.
Thank you.
I can't say enough. This is all 3 of your research has gone deep, and I can imagine that the students that are here as well as in your classes will remember these times, and because it's authentic, you've connected it to their identities, you've connected it to the land and the world around them. This is incredible. It is 4:48. I'm going to just share a little bit, but if you have questions, like how do I do this, or where do I go, or what was your biggest aha moment early on, late on, please put them in the chat. These are extraordinary teachers doing extraordinary work, and of course the students are here, and I'm sure they would love to answer your questions too. So let me just find my slides, but feel free to put into the chat any questions you might have.
Pam, I have a question for each of these teachers. A couple of them hinted at it. And by the way, thank you so much for sharing, everybody. It's just such inspiring work. I know about your work, and I'm still inspired hearing about it again today. So I'm just wondering, why do you do this? To go to the Climate Literacy and Leadership Program, to come to the Action Research Team. It takes days out of your classroom. You do get release days from the school board, but even then, it takes time out of your usual teaching schedule. And there's no doubt that it does add another layer on top of the work that you already do as teachers, which is incredibly complex. So I'm wondering what you get out of the process of being involved in either the CLLP or the Action Research Team, if you can each speak to that.
Nancy,
go in order.
Go first. Yeah.
I think it's the opportunity to first of all help the kids develop this appreciation for the place where they live, for the earth, for all the parts of the earth, and also just how engaged they become when they have that opportunity to take action, to feel like they are doing, to feel like they are contributing. And you see all your learners, even your reluctant learners, suddenly just so sparked and engaged and motivated to not only make the earth a better place, but to read and write and present and all of those academic layers as well. So it's just such an inspiration, and there's nothing more important we can do than help the kids be the stewards of our land.
Thank you, Nancy. Just before I move to Beka to answer that question, Alex, Yoshi, and Billy have put a question, and I'm going to say to all of us, could all of us respond in the chat to their question, what is your favorite part of nature? And then that'll give time for Beka to speak to why does she do this?
Right. I always call myself a heart educator because I feel like I'm in this for the heart of it. And I found being on the action research team, you get to be with other heart educators. And I just feel when you're surrounded by people who are in it for the so what factor, we're not just here to pump out curriculum and check boxes. We're here because we care about the students and we want real learning experiences. So the collaboration part is huge for me. I love going to our meetings, and I feel like it helps me be very reflective as a teacher. So just having to constantly look on my practice and see what's next and allow the students to guide me, which is such an it's encouraged in our group. So I think the reflective part and also the little fire under your butt to do like awesome things with your students because you're surrounded by awesome and you're hearing all these awesome opportunities, and then you realize there's awesome right in front of you as well. And there's so many beautiful learning places no matter what school you're at.
Thank you so much. And over to you, Dan. Why do you do this work?
Well, I guess I'm going to reiterate what both Nancy and Beka have said. It's the connections you're making. Obviously, you're doing them in your course, but it's connections you're making with other teachers. And I think the real advantage that I find, especially, is working with the elementary teachers. It's in the high school, we get stuck in our silos a little too much. You can see how I've reached out to work with Ben, and Ben's reached out to work with me. But I think elementary teachers do that every day, all the time. They're interconnecting all the things that they have going on if they're doing it really well, and they see the opportunities around them. And when you've got young people like Alex, Kiyoshi, and Billy right beside you, or the other great students that Beka brought to Don Mills, and then my high school students see that and they feel empowered that they have something to do with that next generation as well. We can make an impact, and we are making an impact, and we should feel good about what we're doing, because it doesn't matter how tired you are or hot it was today. There's just too many moments of greatness happening to not want to do it even more the next day.
Nicely said. And Alex, Kiyoshi, and Billy, I hope you see in the chat these wonderful answers to your great question. You get different perspectives. Some people like the sunlight through the trees. Some people like the bird sounds, the sound of water, how it smells, changing seasons. Oh my goodness, wildfire flowers. I'm going to ask you three, what are your favorite parts of nature?
So my favorite part about nature will probably be like making experiences outside. For example, I still remember the time when my grandpa came over and like we planted the tomato seeds in our backyard, and it was really fun.
Thank you.
My favorite parts of nature, I love going into a ravine and behind my house and behind the school. And it feels really peaceful just walking through there. Also, I have a zip line down there, so that can't hurt too.
I like making memories in nature, like planting things, like walking in the ravine.
Wonderful. So lots of experiences from all three. And again, those connections from intergenerational to your favorite places to play. Oh, so exciting. And thank you again to those of you in the chat who are adding your favorites. I have to say mine is being in the marsh in a canoe and just being that level, seeing all the things that are growing, the smells, etc. So I think we all have similarities. Before we go, I just want to thank, as I didn't at the very beginning, the people that make this possible, and just also share our upcoming events, So these webinars are possible because of a collaboration between OISE, which is Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, and TDSB, Toronto District School Board. We entered into a partnership because we realized again, like many of you, we don't want to do this alone. We want to do this together. And as Margaret Wheatley so says, we are wise together. And so in the room, we have Sarah Urquhart, who is helping and doing her PhD at the same time, a master juggler, I think. Thank you. And she's doing all the behind the scenes work today. And Hilary Inwood, my good friend, who has really championed this work at OISE and has brought it alive, but also brought in the depth of experience of the action research to really make us go deeper as teachers, as Beka said, that reflection piece. Also in the room are my colleagues, Jen Vetter. Actually, Chris isn't here, but Chris, Jen, and I are at EcoSchools. And again, I am so grateful to Jen for helping us do this great work. She's a relationship-centered person. She always makes sure that we are on track to give the best to the people that we serve. And so it's just been a pleasure to work with Jen. On the screen, you'll see an event that's coming up on June 6th. We encourage you to be part of it. It's called Cultivating Connections, and that's our theme: cultivating connections to nature, cultivating connections to climate change, and of course with each other. We can't do this alone. It will be at OISE on Bloor Street, 252 Bloor Street, from 4:30 to 6. You're going to be treated to so many other teachers sharing their projects and expertise in small groups through kind of a learning carousel. Sometimes we call that speed dating in the eco world, but yeah, it'll be lots of fun. We also have our very first ever climate camp that'll be happening August 22nd or 19th to 22nd up in Mono Cliffs, and talk about beautiful nature, the ferns and the cliffs, the limestone cliffs on the escarpment. Wonderful place to learn. This will be deep, rich learning, centering equity, centering inclusion, and we're so glad to be working with the Urban Indigenous Education Center on the program on this. And of course, if you want to have access to other webinars, so many great resources there. Both websites have links to each other, but also you can go deeper into some of the things that both TDSB is doing and OISE is doing.